Okay, is it just me, or did they put that at a slightly lower pitch now?
I think there was something going on there with the timing. But, regardless of the timing, it is 10 o'clock on Saturday night, and this is Starfleet Tactical. So Lissa pointed out in the pregame show that we went over 30 minutes last time, and we went over 30 minutes the time before that, which means that we're technically an hour ahead on Starfleet Tactical. So goodbye, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Damn, I came out for this?
So look, we were planning this prank.
Yeah, we planned to do that. So I, of course, am Chris Weave. I have with me as always, almost always behind the scenes, although not always on camera, Lissa Beck. And I also have the rarely seen on this show these days, Alec Peters. So good to see you, Alec. Thank you for joining me. I was telling Alec that I'm really glad that he offered to jump on the show tonight, because I had this plan on what I was going to talk about tonight. And I'm not ready to do the full version of that. So Wright's already asking if anybody's speaking for their employer. Alec, actually, since he's self-employed, he could theoretically be speaking for his employer.
I do speak for my employer.
You are the only person I think we've ever had on this show who speaks for his employer.
I stream, but I stream across multiple platforms. So I speak for myself, which technically would be my employer when I'm on my Twitch channel. But outside of my Twitch channel, I don't speak for them.
Well, and you're an official rep, so sometimes you speak for them, but probably not on this show.
It's true.
Except when you're showing off something that you've got, right?
Exactly.
So, life with you, Lissa, is actually quite complicated. With me, it's pretty much I never am speaking for my employer. But Pat is not here. Pat had a social obligation, so I'm actually not sure exactly where he is. He just told me it is social obligation. I said that I had a plan for what I was going to talk about tonight. But in fact, I even told TJ, I had a conversation with TJ last night and told him what the plan was going to be. And now that's not quite the plan. But there's plenty of things going on in the world. In fact, before the show started, we were talking about Ukraine, which I don't know if people have heard, but there's this little dust up taking place in Ukraine right now. So I was just about to comment about how they got rid of their nuclear weapons. And it was probably, if I were in the Ukrainians' position, I wouldn't want to have any nuclear weapons, because people don't understand that nuclear weapons are really, really complex machines that require a huge amount of overhead to keep working. They're not wooden, what the military would call a wooden round, right? A harpoon missile is officially considered a wooden round. It comes in a canister. You put the canister on the ship. Maybe every now and then you go and plug a little piece of test gear into it and say, is it still working? Yeah, it's still working. But you never have to pull out a screwdriver and do maintenance on it or anything. Nuclear weapons have material that undergoes radioactive decay. And that radioactive decay changes the material that it is, and it changes all the things around it. And all those weapons were designed with the idea that you've got this huge nuclear complex to keep them all maintained.
Yep.
This is why I think, anybody who wants to have fewer U.S. nuclear weapons should support the reliable replacement warhead. Because the entire idea behind the reliable replacement warhead is that if we built nuclear weapons that were designed to be something closer to be wooden rounds, we could have fewer of them, because you don't have to cycle them out for maintenance in the same way that you do with the current crop.
Andrew, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. So I've always thought that somebody should do like a story where, several hundred years in the future, people are recovering from the apocalypse, etc. Some warlords got some nuclear weapons, and he's proudly showing them off to the protagonists And the protagonist can see that all the seals are still current. And he's saying, yeah, the seals aren't even broken, but the protagonist is smart enough to know that that means that they don't work because they're like 300-year-old nuclear weapons that have never had any maintenance done on them. So it's like,
I feel like I've seen a tabletop that you could easily throw that into. There's plenty of tabletop.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You could use that setting for.
Yeah, but nuclear weapons are just fascinating machines. They really are. It's a shame they killed millions of people at a time, but they're fascinating machines.
Mutually assured destruction. No problem with that, right?
And if you read anything about how, they talk about 1-point safety, and it's basically nuclear weapons as a general rule are designed to not explode if you mistreat them and break if they're not armed.
Yeah, that's true.
So you want them to be fragile up until the point where they're not fragile.
It's a very fine line.
So
okay, interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah, because you don't want one going off because it fell off a truck.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So,
well, I tell you, the thing that's amazing is as long as nuclear weapons, how long have they been around now? 70 years.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. There hasn't been a major accident with one. Right? And we've lost them.
There's
pretty good at that.
We've had a lot of minor accidents that could have been major accidents. Like there's a book called Command and Control. It's got a blue cover, and I can't remember the author's name. It'll come to me. And the subtitle talks about the Damascus incident, and so about half to 2/3 of the book is the Damascus incident, which is back in the early 1980s. You may recall a nuclear missile, a Titan II in Arkansas, blew up in the silo.
Oh yeah, I do remember
Eric
that.
Schlosser.
Yeah, Eric Schlosser. And it's a fantastic book. So a bunch of that book is like a minute by minute telling of the story of how exactly it happened, why it happened, what happened, etc., and exactly how it worked. And then another part of it is like the history of trying to make weapons 1-point safe. Well, the SAC was carrying them on airborne alert, and airplanes have problems, especially airplanes back in the 50s and 60s. The engines weren't as reliable, and you occasionally ended up with things like a burning airplane on a runway. And nuclear weapons can catch fire. The explosive will burn. It won't detonate, but it will burn. Well, it might not detonate. At one point, they had calculated that the explosive would burn for 13 minutes or something like that, and then it would detonate. And they fought the fire for like 18 minutes and put it out.
Holy shit!
Now, detonate doesn't mean a big boom, but it does mean a small boom. And it does mean even if all that goes off is the conventional explosives, and you don't have any fission, and the fission package doesn't go off at all, you're still spewing radioactive material.
Oh
yeah.
Absolutely.
And so there were lots of airplane crashes and this and that and the other thing. He tells a story in the book about how one of the guys who was designed to do 1-point safety was working on a 1-point safety study, and they had just certified all the Air Force's weapons as being 1-point safe. And 1-point safety is defined as, so you've got multiple explosives around the outer core, and the idea is that they have to go off synchronized to sort of explosively squeeze everything down and cause the reaction to happen. And so 1-point safety is that if you only detonate, in one location, and so you don't get a synchronized explosion, that you do not, there's less than a 1 in a million chance of getting an appreciable nuclear yield.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had just certified all the weapons, and this guy's like sound asleep, and he just like rockets bolt upright in bed because he realized that they had missed a test case.
Oh my gosh.
What happens if the weapon is dropped, or the whatever it is that causes it to go off happens at the intersection of 3 of those explosive plates? Because it's like a soccer ball. Right, the explosive looks like the shapes.
Right.
What happens if it catches it right at the intersection of that? and they went back and redid the study, and everything would have gone boom.
Oh.
So, yeah. So, okay. So I'm looking at some of the comments here. Yeah, the Titans had big warheads. That's why we kept them around, because they had like a 10 megaton warhead. Everything else was like the standard 225 of the... Oh, shit. I was a nuclear guy before I was a naval guy. I used to be able to tell you, like, I could rattle off the numbers for all the nuclear weapons, the names of all the nukes. But it was a 10 megaton warhead they had on the Titan IIs, and they kept them around because they kept around like 50 of them, because they figured, there's a few things you might want to drop something real big on. And it was liquid fueled. In fact, it was liquid fueled. It had to be pressurized for it to maintain its shape. And what happened was, a guy had like this big long wrench with a thing on the end, and the thing on the end fell off and bounced around and he's at the very top, because they were going to do maintenance on the warhead portion of it. And it bounces down, and as it's bouncing off the scaffolding and stuff, it hit the side of the missile and poked a hole in it.
Oh, God.
And so now you've got pressurized, I forget exactly what that fuel was, but bad shit, right?
Right. Yeah.
That is a good term for it. Yes.
Hydrogen in military weapons, because they have to sit in the hole for months, years, and you can't do that with oxygen and hydrogen. And so it caused a hole, and it was like an hour or two before it went boom. But the thing is, it's like they said, we drop tools all the time, right? You'd have to go down to like 4 stories or 3 stories, and there was like a catch basin at the bottom, and you just have to, all right, I have to go get the tool, and you'd go down and get the tool and go back up and go back to work. And he said that they drop stuff all the time. It's just this time it poked a hole. And incidentally, that hole they poked, they calculated the amount of force it took to poke that hole. And that was the number that they used in the Reagan administration for the brilliant pebbles calculations. How much kinetic energy do you need to impart on a missile to break its skin?
Interesting. By the way, I want to say hi to Raj Kala, who has stopped by, our very own Admiral Singh from Axanar.
Oh,
hey, there's Raj. Dude, love you too, man. I hope all's going well. We need to catch up. He's a great guy, Raj. He's great. But sorry to break.
No, that's good.
Consciousness there. I got to tell you that. So when I was a senior in college back in the dark ages, I had a professor, and he was like the strangest. He was definitely on the spectrum, and the class was I think the class was something like Soviet military history or something like that for the Cold War. It was all about the Cold War, right? And this guy had been a student of Zbigniew Brzezinski at Columbia. And he was like his grad assistant or something. So and I was at Adelphi out on Long Island. So I guess this was his first job and everything. And so I love the class. I mean, because it's, the class was basically what you and I talk about all the time. And it was fast. It was really great. And so we got into, there was one class where he was going over and he said he was going to be talking about basically the hardware of, and the arms race part of it. Like literally we were going to get detailed into the arms race part of Soviet-American relations. And so I went to the library and I read, was it Norman Polar who had one of the, was he that one? Anyway, I read up on everything that was going on. Because I love this stuff. So it was like, I'm going to go read about this all stuff because this is going to be fun. So we get into class. My good friend Charles Mead was sat next to me in the class, and it was really funny because it was the weirdest little classroom. It was 2 rows deep. That was it. But it was like really wide. So there were 2 rows deep, but it was like, 18 chairs wide. So he and I were right sat together right up front. Well, up front, you couldn't hide in that class. And so as professor is going through and he's going through all the stuff, and he's getting really like technical. And I know that like half the class is just like, yeah, whatever, you know. And he's talking about the classes of submarines, and he's talking about the ICBMs and this and that. And he would, and what wind up happening is he would like stumble looking for the class of aircraft or the tonnage of the ICBM or whatever. And I would just boom, as soon as he stumbled, I go Su-27. Oh, yeah, Su-27. And he wouldn't look up. Like, so he was always like this. Oh yeah. And so I'd be finishing his sentences for him whenever he stumbled.
Oh,
Alec freezes.
We lost him. Quick.
He'll be back.
Alec. Ooga booga booga.
Yeah, this so for what it was
this happens with Crystal all the time.
Of course.
Hey, Alec, we lost you. You froze at the point where you said finishing his sentences.
Oh, so I'm finishing the sentences. He's not looking up, so it's like he doesn't even know what's going on. He just knows he's picking all these facts out of the air to finish the sentences. Like, you know, he's like, oh yeah, and then the Soviets, you know, released the what class is submarine? I go Typhoon class, and he just keeps rolling through these sentences, picking these facts up from me. And everyone in the class is looking like, how the frack do you know this stuff, Alec? Because I was a geek. And anyway, so that was the way the whole class went. And at the end, my friend was like, that was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. Because not only did I know all the facts, you know, all this stuff, but the professor didn't pick up on the fact that I was like, there was this guy in the audience there in his classroom that was feeding him all these facts, and he was just rolling through it, oblivious to what was going on, which is the way he lectured, because he was one of those guys, he just lectured. And if you didn't interrupt him, he just kept going and going and going. But anyway.
I took a class. So I went to the University of Iowa.
Hawkeyes.
The Hawkeyes. And I've often said that if I went, so I later, when I was living with Arias Kaufman in Charlottesville, he was finally finishing his undergraduate degree at the University of Virginia. And I've often said that if I'd gone to UVA versus the University of Iowa, I'd be a professor of Roman history someplace now. Because the University of Iowa had a classics program, not a ancient history program, and I'll come back on that in a second. But I took a class called, one of the 3 ancient history classes that they had at Iowa was National and Religious Resistance to Ancient Empires.
Wow.
Okay.
And I took it because it was one of so there were 3 Roman history classes. There was the Hellenistic world in Rome. So we did Alexander the Great to the fall of Rome in one class. There was, that's just the wrong way to do it.
Like in one day, or you mean one semester?
No. It was, we started off with the Alexander the Great, and we did all of Alexander the Great. Then we jumped back to the founding of Rome, and we did all of Rome. But it's like why aren't those 2 classes, right?
Right.
Yeah.
You think?
So the professor at one point, I had a visiting prof for that class, and she said that she was talking with one of her colleagues back at her home institution, and he said, "How many days are you spending on the Battle of Cannae?" And she said, "I'm doing all 3 Punic Wars in one lesson."
Oh my God!
Because I mean, yeah. And so I then took National and Religious Resistance to Ancient Empires because it was one of the 3 Roman history courses. The third one was the concept of the city, Rome. And then so it was cross-listed as an urban planning class. So it started from the founding of Rome up to like the modern era. And so I'm in National and Religious Resistance to Ancient Empires, and I think there were 3 of us taking it for a grade, and then like maybe 1 or 2 others that were auditing. There was,
wow.
Yeah, it was kind of weird. There was like 4. There was never more than 4 people there, but like the 4th person changed halfway through, and I never did figure out what was going on there. I was like, everybody else was taking it because they needed some history credits, and it fit in with their schedule. And it was this weird 2-credit hour class instead of a 3-credit hour class. I took it because I wanted a Roman history class. And then, so I wasn't real happy when the professor the first day said, yeah, I'm going to buzz through the Roman history stuff as fast as possible to get to the part that
Oh.
All right. The part that he was interested in was really interesting. The guy was a rabbi who was an expert, an academic expert in the Book of Daniel, and he talked about how the Book of Daniel had been rewritten. The prophecies in the Book of Daniel had been rewritten so that because only the priestly class knew how to read, right? So they would like rewrite stuff to make it sound like, oh yeah, it's talking about right now.
Well, and that's why when it comes to like religion in general, the way I say it is it's the longest game of telephone in human history.
Well, these guys were doing it on purpose. Now, I found this utterly fascinating. I was the only one. So the funny thing about it is like, okay, so you've got a class that 3 people are taking it for a grade, and there's only really one person who's really kind of interested in it. And so people just like would not show up for class. And so like, it's almost inevitable that at one time, one person's going to show up for class. That person was me. I didn't miss any classes on this one. That person was me. I came in, he came in, sat down at the desk, lectured at me like there were 1,000 people in that room.
Yep.
Because that's
what you gotta do.
And so, okay, to make this even more fun. So David Drake, Bane author, the Tank, Hammer Slammers, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, yeah.
David Drake is a graduate of the University of Iowa. He went there 20 years before I graduated. He graduated almost exactly 20 years before me. He was a history major at the University of Iowa. And in the afterword to his book, The Northworld Trilogy, he talks about how, he wanted to do this thing based on the Old Norse legends. And so he decided he was going to do it. And he then he said, I then did what I was always taught by the best professor I ever had, Professor Jonathan Goldstein of the University of Iowa. I went back and read the primary sources.
Yep.
Jonathan Goldstein is the guy who taught national religious resistance to ancient empires. And so it's like, whoa, shit, right? And the thing is, he was like the only guy in the history department from that time period. Goldstein was brilliant, but when I got him, he was also a crazy old guy. Who had a really bad back, and they were giving him some really good meds. They were giving him some really good meds. So he was a crazy old guy.
I mean. But
I remember I said something to David Drake in an email about that once. We had also corresponded about Iowa involvement in the Civil War. Iowa had more troops per capita than any other state.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, small population. So it was troops.
Per capita makes it sound bigger than it really is. Like that's like a comparative thing versus everywhere else.
Yeah, like there certainly Virginia probably had more on both sides than Iowa. Either side probably had more Virginia had more on either side than Iowa did. But on a per capita basis, Iowa had the greatest participation. Yep. Which if you think about it, that was about Iowa became a state in 1848. That's about as far west as you can get and still be in states. I don't think Nebraska was a state at that point.
I think you're correct.
I can't remember when Nebraska joined, but
we can find out. That's what Google's for.
It's Nebraska. They're kind of slow about a lot of stuff. So, but so yeah, that was kind of crazy. But
1867 is when Nebraska joined.
Yeah, like 20 years later. So somebody just asked what my take on the Moskva is. I noticed that that Putin fired the admiral in charge, and I do not understand why they successfully got the fire out. I don't understand what the big deal is.
And by the way, and I was surprised when they said the Moskva. I remember the helicopter cruiser.
Yeah, they decommissioned the helicopter carrier. It was the Moskva and the Leningrad, if I remember correctly. It was a two ship class. Those ships came out in like the late 60s, if I remember correctly. Then the Kiev came out, which had the angled deck.
Right,
and so when that one came out, that the Moskva and its sister ship were, in fact, I think it was the Leningrad class, I think, if I remember correctly. They had some issues. If Chris Carlson were on, he could talk about that in some detail. But I never went to the old. There used to be something called the Soviet Naval Analyst Dinner that took place in Washington D.C. and I think it might have actually been a thing that the Allies came to too. But it was this big dinner that they had, and there was a traditional toast that was to the Soviet Navy and the sinking thereof.
Nice.
I'm pretty much in favor of that.
I think they need some aloe for that.
So Well, I think the sinking of the Moskva makes up for the bombing of the people on that island at the beginning of the war.
Yeah. And, the thing is, so this is actually something like we get to see a little bit of damage control in Star Trek. And I'd really like to see exactly what sort of gear they have behind those nifty little panels that they have, other than that we know that they have like phaser rifles and stuff.
Right.
But basically, when you walk down the hallway, there's gear behind all that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you go aboard a U.S. Navy warship, you sort of look around and you sort of be very cognizant of what you're seeing, you'll see a couple of things. First of all, there are virtually no drop-down ceilings any place in the entire ship. The only place I've ever seen a drop-down ceiling is in the wardroom. So there's none of this like false ceiling with the absorbent panels, et cetera.
Right.
Bare metal, and you're seeing cable runs and you're
pipes
seeing pipes and conduits and all the rest of that stuff. And that's because we used to do drop-down ceilings. But the thing is, drop-down ceilings are really bad from a damage control standpoint.
Sure, yeah.
Because they high damage and they catch on fire.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then it's like you end up with all that stuff coming down. Like how much. The big joke, of course, in Star Trek, like Next Gen, et cetera, is like, where do the rocks come from?
Right, exactly. Where do I?
So there are no rocks on a U.S. Navy ship, and then you walk through the hallways, you'll notice that you don't see like lots of wood paneling any place either, right? There's very little wood paneling. Mostly it's metal. You walk through the hallways, and there's damage control equipment everywhere. There's like backboards. To carry people away. There's fire axes. There's just like timbers to shore up compartments. There's big wrenches. There's all this stuff. And it's just like along the walls. Every place you go, there is damage control equipment. So you don't have to go run to get something. It's right there.
It's just a storage room that's to the side you never see.
Yeah, and everything is nicely labeled. The pipes all have labels on it, and they have an arrow telling you the direction of flow and all the rest of it. And, you go aboard foreign ships. I haven't spent a whole lot of time on foreign ships, but everybody I've been on, who's been on one has said, yeah, they've got nice wood paneling and they've got drop ceilings and the hallways are nice and wide and stuff like that. Like the Japanese build their ships to what we would consider to be commercial standards. Because there's an entirely separate rule book for naval standards, U.S. naval standards versus U.S. commercial standards. And they include things like on a U.S. Navy ship, you've got something called the damage control deck. And the idea behind the damage control deck is that unless you're having catastrophic flooding, the damage control deck the water will never get up that high. But below the damage control deck, you can expect those spaces to flood and the ship will stay afloat. The damage control deck defines where you find watertight doors. So if I'm at the bottom of the ship, and I've been in staterooms or, I've been in berthing areas that have been down low. If I want to go to the next compartment over, I have to go up and over and down. There's no door.
Oh, wow.
And that's because even if it's a watertight door with all those fancy latches and stuff like that, when you get hit by a torpedo or a missile, things get damaged, things get twisted, door spring leaks. Better to just have a metal bulkhead. And so I look at a Star Trek setup and I go, what damage can be hiding? It's great that they've got all the equipment there, but what damage can be behind all that stuff?
Yeah.
Yep.
And yes, grab the pipe, follow it.
Grab the pipe. So I was told by I didn't get this in the safety briefing, the one and only time I got to go fly in a helicopter, but I've been told by somebody else that, like, if the helicopter is going to end up in the water, you're sitting on a bench against the side, right? This was a Chinook. So I'm sitting against the side, or whatever the Navy equivalent of a Chinook is. And you're sitting on this bench along the wall, right? So it's like a bus, you're facing each other. It's like the center seats of a bus. And what I was told is if you're going to end up in the water, you reach down and grab the metal bar on the canvas seat you're sitting in, and you use whichever hand where you can point your thumb at the nearest door. And you resolve that you will never let go, regardless of what happens, because that's going to point you in the direction of safety.
Huh.
I wonder what they teach the Starfleet guys when they're flying in the shuttle.
It's a very good question. Clearly, they are not teaching the red shirts well enough, though. And
going back to nuclear weapons and stuff, photon torpedoes don't. We have some idea how photon torpedoes work because they've sort of built it up over time. And of course, if you go back and if you read the Holy Book, written by Sternbach and Okuda, they talk about photon torpedoes, and one of the things that's clear about them is that they don't travel around with antimatter loaded into the photon torpedo, right? That's, you have to have this complicated launcher. Part of it is you got to pipe antimatter around to put it in to arm the torpedo. But I've always wondered, like, what sort of checks do they have to do in the torpedoes? I mean, I'm always amazed about how, stuff in Star Trek doesn't just break, right?
It's those futuristic alloys.
Yeah, I mean,
I think that's the explanation for the rocks too. The futuristic alloys, when they explode and they turn into rocks.
Must be. But I mean, it's like stuff just doesn't break in this universe. Now, it can get damaged, don't get me wrong. But, it's not like your car where it's like, yeah, I turned the ignition and it just won't start. It worked fine yesterday. Now it doesn't work. What's going on? Right. Mm-hmm. Part of that is because they've got a lot of automated testing and stuff.
That's true.
That takes care of all that stuff. Right. Level 3 diagnostic, right? The magic words.
I don't know if you guys hear her purring.
And you got to think that they're running those. The computer is running the diagnostics, constantly.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I really love about the Sternbach Okuda book, the Next Gen Tech Manuals, it talks about the stuff that's done every shift, right? So there's certain diagnostics that are done every shift, and there are other diagnostics, like if you go to red alert, there are diagnostics that are automatically triggered by going to red alert.
Yeah, sure, of course.
And that's one of the things I really love about that book, is that it's got like a list of procedures that happen. Like when you go to red alert, it also will automatically do things like bring fusion reactors online, et cetera, et cetera. And, the Navy does stuff like that. I was, let's see, I'm trying to remember which ship it was. I can't remember if I think it was Porter. So I think it was the first time I went to sea on a destroyer. Because that was a trip where I was on board for a week, and due to some connectivity issues, I went on board to do a particular thing that depended upon them sending me a database onto the ship, and then we would put it onto the Palm Pilot, and I would conduct a little experiment I was there to do with the independent duty corpsman.
That tells you how long ago it was. It was a Palm Pilot.
This was September of 2000. It was September of 2000. And when I get on board the ship, I say something about, getting an address so that they can send me this stuff. And they said, "Oh, our internet's down. It's like hard down." And it's like, "Are you going to get it back?" And it's like, "Well, we're working on it." And so every day I'd ask the executive officer, it's like, hey, what's the scoop? What's the scoop? What's the scoop? And finally he said, yeah, they told us we're making it worse and to stop. Ooh. So it's like, I basically got sent to sea to do something that I couldn't do. And so I ended up I improvised something that actually turned out to be really important. At one point, the admiral that was briefed, she learned something that she didn't know that they were doing. And she said it was worth the cost of sending that guy on board that ship for a week just for me to find out they were doing that, because I had no idea they were doing that.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. That's good, at least.
Yeah. DDG 78, as Wright said. I spent a week on DDG 78 and then 2 weeks on DDG 77, and they were built by different shipyards, and they had all these little subtle differences internally, and it was fantastic. It's like, wait a minute, shouldn't there be a door there? No, the door's around the corner. Oh, okay. But we were getting ready to do an underway replenishment, and I'm standing out on the bridge wing, and all of a sudden I hear this noise, and I look over, and there's this big cloud of black smoke coming out of the mast, the smokestack. And so I turned to actually on second thought, this was definitely on OK in DDG 77. I said, what was that? And he said, oh, they were bringing turbines 3 and 4 online. I said, what?
I don't think it's supposed to do that.
No, actually, that's normal. That's normal. But it's so they will, like they had made an announcement right beforehand. They said the restricted maneuvering doctrine is in effect.
And that doesn't sound ominous at all.
And so what that means, because what we were doing is we were getting ready to do something where when it's like calling red alert, except it's like more routine than that. When they call restricted maneuvering, everybody starts going through their checklist and doing stuff. And one of the things is you bring all 4 gas turbines online. Because as it is, they would normally cruise with just 2 for fuel efficiency purposes, because the most fuel intensive thing you can do with a jet engine is to turn it on, just like with a car, right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, the most fuel intensive thing you can do with your car is just turn it on, even if you're just sitting there in park. And so they turn off engines when they can't. They turn off the gas turbines when they can't.
Yeah.
And these are the same jet engines that were in DC-10s. The LM2500 is basically a converted DC-10 jet engine. And they, yep, right, put it in there. Yep, the LM2500 is fantastic. So when they call restricted maneuvering, one of the things is like you're very close, and you may need a lot of throttle really fast. And so you start flipping all the switches so that you can, and there's certain stuff you don't do when you're in restricted maneuvering, and there's other stuff that you always do when you're in restrictive maneuvering. And it's just because you're very close to another ship, and you look at it and you go, I'm 100 feet away. What's the big deal? Right? Well, there's a couple of parts of that make it a big deal. One is that the water flowing over the hull of both of you is creating low pressure. And so it's trying to suck you together.
Oh, interesting.
Yep.
So one of the ways they handle that is they'll shoot a line across, and they've got line handlers on either side. And on the one side, they try to keep, the lines have flags every so often, like every 10 feet. And so they try to keep the end over one side, and then the other side, they sort of let it play out. And now you can count the flags and tell how far apart you are.
Yep.
There was something else I was going to say about
that's also, even with like smaller vessels, that'll happen. Like if there's a smaller one and a bigger one, like because on like rivers that only have like a certain amount of ability to get through, like you'll use tugboats.
Yeah. And
with the tugboats, you'll see that used on occasion as well.
And let's see. Let me go. I'm going to finish talking about underway replenishment, and then I want to talk about what you just said, Melissa. And there's another example that also happened during an underway replenishment that a friend of mine, one of my former coworkers at CNA, saw. The other thing when you're doing an underway replenishment like that, the thing to keep in mind about controlling a ship is that it's the functional equivalent of anytime you move the steering wheel in your car, it takes 3 seconds before it actually moves. Rudders are inefficient. It's hard to move a ship, right? It's just hard to move a ship. What a rudder really does is it turns the ship sideways, and in the force of the water in the hull causes the change in direction. And so that's a long process. And so it's not easy to control a ship very finely, and you have this and you're trying to keep it at a set distance, et cetera, and that's really problematic. Now, the other thing about that water running by the ship, it does also create this sort of tunnel effect. One of my former coworkers, was on board an aircraft carrier getting refueled in the Gulf during the Gulf War. And at one point, they all looked down as the Iraqi mine passed between the two ships.
Oh, geez.
That's not terrifying at all.
Because of that Venturi effect, right? The water's flowing faster there, so it basically pushed it to the center. So at the same time, it started keeping the water in the center, but it's trying to pull the two ships together.
Oh, wow. Geez.
And then you also have all sorts of nifty ship handling stuff. Like when you get in shallow water, you end up with stuff where like the stern will squat down. And at least one submarine collision happened in the Persian Gulf because the submarine was trying to pass underneath a tanker, and the movement of the tanker caused a pressure decrease that sucked the submarine up into the tanker.
Oh.
Yeah, that was bad. And then basically it rolled the submarine over on its side, and then as the propeller from the tanker came over the submarine, it went whack, 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 and did not penetrate the pressure hull, but it wasn't for lack of trying.
Wow. Oh, fudge.
Did they have to like ballast themselves afterwards again? Like reballast themselves?
I think at that point they just stayed on the surface because they just
we ain't going under.
You get to
no, I meant to flip themselves back over.
Oh no, they because they rolled over because they got hit.
Oh, okay.
They got pushed over. So once they were no longer in contact with the other ship, they righted themselves. Is my understanding. Now, I haven't read the report on it. I just happened to be, I was at the Naval War College at the time. The guy in the cubicle next to me was a retired submariner. We're looking at this report going like, what do you think happened? And we pieced it together. It was mostly Bill. Bill was saying like, okay, it sounds to me like this is what happened, and this is how you'd expect that to happen. And he put on his submarine hat. He explained it to the civilian about how that all worked. Somebody mentioned watching a documentary about Carl Vinson. I've been on Carl Vinson watching her unwrap. Carl Vinson is my favorite aircraft carrier. I always had a good experience on Carl Vinson. That was one reason she's my favorite aircraft carrier. And the other one is her call sign when I was on board in the sort of, 2002, 2004 time period, or 2002, 2003 time period. Her call sign at that point was Battlestar. I'm sorry, was Golden Eagle. I blew it. Was Golden Eagle. But her call sign before that, when she was commissioned, because she was commissioned in 1980, her call sign used to be Battlestar.
Oh, wow. Very cool.
That's great.
And I have not been able to track down exactly when that changed. I haven't been able to figure out exactly when, but I had a great time on Carl Vinson. Now, John C. Stennis, I had some good times and some bad times on Stennis.
By the way, when you're on a ship as a civilian, how are you dressed?
So that's actually a very interesting question, and that's a question that the answer has changed over time. By the time I was at CNA, there was only one person I know of that did it the old-fashioned way, which is you were dressed as an officer. In the old days, you wore khakis. and you had a collar device that said either OEG, Operations Evaluation Group, if you were really, really old, or it said CNA. And that's how you were dressed. By the time I got there, there was only one guy I know who went to sea that way, and he was like the third most senior guy in the company. This is a place where everybody who went to work at CNA, the usual thing was you were there for 3 years or you were there for 40. That's generally seemed to be the way it worked out. And this is a guy who had been there for like 38 years. I always went, I wore khaki slacks, sort of business casual shoes. I mean, you want something that's relatively sturdy. I did not go with steel toe, but I could have, probably should have, but I didn't, because I wanted something that was a little bit more comfortable, because I was going to be spending almost all my time standing. So it's got to be something that's got a nice, comfortable sole, but you don't want a rubber sole, because rubber and fuel, rubber gets really
static,
slippery on fuel.
Oh.
And then I wore long sleeve blue shirts. Now, one of my mentors had suggested not wearing blue shirts because enlisted guys wear blue shirts.
Right.
I went ahead and did it. It turns out that wasn't an issue. He knew somebody that had that issue sometime previously, where he wore a blue shirt at sea and they treated him badly. Between you and me and the 10 million people on YouTube, I think it's because that guy was a dick.
That'll do it.
Yeah, I think that was just that I think the reason why he was being hassled was because they didn't like him. But and long sleeve shirts and with as much cotton as you can get, that's what they're wearing, because that plastic shit will just melt to you if there's a missile hit.
Oof.
Right? And I always dressed like I was going into a war zone.
And that's fair. That's actually entirely reasonable, because you don't know if, like, at any given point in time, even if you're on the ship, someone's going to get a call and they've got to go out.
Yeah. And that stuff like that happens all the time. I mean, the USS, I said this once before, I said I thought it was the Iowa. Somebody else told me that they thought it was the Missouri, I think. But there was a U.S. battleship that went to sea for what was supposed to be a 2-week period and came back 18 months later.
Holy crap.
Back in the 80s, when Lebanon blew up back in the 80s.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that she was.
I want to say that was the Iowa.
I thought it was the Iowa, but somebody else said that they thought it. I think that it was the Missouri and New Jersey. Wright says it's the New Jersey, because Wright said that. Wright told me that, and I went, "Are you sure?" And I went and did some research, and it's like, yeah, it wasn't the Iowa.
Yeah, you're right. It was the New Jersey. Yep.
And it was so, and they did a home port change in there, and et cetera, and like the entire crew failed to re-up. And it caused a big stink in Congress that the Navy was treating its people that way. And it was bad. It was bad. But so, there's always that possibility. There's a story that I heard. I think maybe I told this story on the show once before, but I'm going to tell it again. Tammy Wynette and her husband, George Jones, were doing some sort of USO visit to a ship. And their ship ended up, because of operational reasons, it got sent off away from the rest of the battle group it was with. And the thing is, the Navy will not fly passenger transfers at night. So if the helicopter isn't, or the COD, the carrier onboard delivery aircraft, if it can't make it onto the ground or the ship before sundown, they won't fly you. They'll make you stay the night, because they don't want to do search and rescue in the dark if they can avoid it.
That's reasonable, actually.
Yeah, one of the things, like when the ship takes off, when the airplane takes off, one of the things they report is the number of people on board, so they know how many people to go looking for if it ends up in the water.
Yep.
Right? 11 souls on board, 12 souls on board, something like that. And so she's on board this ship, and the operational concerns sort of take them apart, and they eventually look at it and go, okay, you're spending the night. We can't get you back before we run out of daylight. You're spending the night. And so at some point, the guy who told me the story, who was one of the helicopter pilots at the time, he gets called into the captain's office. His call sign was Hollywood. It should tell you everything you need to know about him. Hollywood gets called into the captain's office, and the captain says, okay, we got a problem. George Jones has an alcohol issue, and he's beginning to get the DTs. And so we want to help this guy out, but, the ship is officially dry. But I figure that if anybody knows if there's alcohol on board, it would be you. I'm declaring an amnesty. If you and somebody else can help me out on this, no, won't take any. We'll just forget it ever happened.
Wow.
Can you help me? At which point Hollywood says, what's he drink? And the captain says, fuck. He drinks Johnny Walker. Black or red?
Meaning someone had a stash of a variety of different things.
He drinks red. Okay, I'll see what I can do. And he goes away, and he comes back like a half hour, 45 minutes later with a gym bag, puts the gym bag on his desk, opens it out, pulls out 2 bottles of Johnny Walker Red.
Oh my God, that's hysterical. It's hysterical.
Yeah, Wright points out that Navy ships carry beer for Steel Beach picnics, and what they usually do is they put a boat in the water and they make you like drink the beer when you're out off the ship. But this guy wasn't into beer. He was doing something harder than that.
They've been officially dry in the Navy for a while. When my grandfather was in the Navy, they were officially dry, but they definitely had alcohol on that freaking sub.
Yeah, and back in the 60s, the dirty little secret, as I understand it, I obviously wasn't on board any aircraft carriers in the 1960s. The dirty little secret apparently was that they just turned a blind eye when it came to what the pilots were doing. Mm-hmm. Because basically the pilots were fighting the war and all the rest of them were just running an airport, right? If you weren't a pilot or a swift boat guy, you weren't in any danger in that war. And everybody sort of understood that the pilots were taking it on the chin for everybody, and they just sort of turned the other way. Now, is that good for good order and discipline? That I put that in the category of the sort of question that I always avoid making sort of too strong a determination on, because I never wore the uniform. I never had any of the leadership training. I never, that wasn't my role in all of this. Like, I would write a report where I would state the facts, and if somebody said, "Yeah, but was the captain right to do that?" I'd say, "Not my question. I'm telling you what happened. I am not this was a situation where somebody was getting prepared to violate doctrine." In a situation where it could potentially be a blue on blue situation, right? Blue on blues usually happen when you turn off a safety mechanism, right? It's because you think it's like, you know what? I know why that safety mechanism's in place, but I got it. I've got situational awareness. I know what's going on here. There's no danger. And every time I've seen a group of officers talking about turning off a safety procedure, there's always like have you thought about this? It's like, oh no, we didn't think about that. Okay then. But, like I said, not my call. I wasn't there to be
aware this is a possibility.
I was there to record facts, put those facts, organize those facts, put them in order, ask the questions necessary to pull out other facts that would illuminate the situation, and then bundle it all up and hand it off to somebody. But I remember getting on that particular one, I got a phone call from the lead CNA analyst who was still back in California in San Diego. And he said, "Yeah, I briefed your slide, and there was a lot of consternation." And Rocket, who was one of the officers from the senior officer observer team who was on board, he said, "Rocket doesn't remember it that way." And I said, "I can send you my notebook. Rocket wasn't taking notes. I made a note of the fact that I was the only person taking notes. Because when people start turning off safety procedures, I mean, I always used a hardbound notebook because as a friend of mine always did the same thing, and I decided it was a good policy for the exact same reason. I'm using a hardbound notebook. If this gets subpoenaed, I don't want there to be anybody saying like I want it to be obvious if somebody's removed pages.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I assumed that my notebook was going to be a legal document.
By the way, I want to get back to we were talking way earlier in this conversation about computers and in Star Trek and what was happening on the computers. And I just wanted, because I know we're nearing the end of our hour here. You know, one of the things you have to think about when you think about Star Trek and what was happening on a starship is that those computers are so sophisticated that they can handle so much information that they can transport, a dozen people at the same time. And transporting a person think of the computing power that takes is massive, even theoretically, it's massive. So the computers, that's why the computer core, when you look at the blueprints of like the Enterprise D, the computer core is enormous.
Oh yeah.
And it's surrounded by a subspace field, so it can operate at faster than light speeds.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's a quantum computer, is what it is, really.
Yeah, so it's
probably tri-quantum or something.
Yeah,
it's up right. So it's so far above it's so far above our, maybe imagination's the right word, but our normal thinking that these computers can basically do anything they want to do. And they would be, and which gets back to kind of like what we've talked about in the past, like how battles happen in Star Trek. They don't happen the way we're shown that they happen. That Picard doesn't say fire; the computer tells you when to fire.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the things. So when we're talking about computers are constantly, the computer is basically like a living organism that knows every aspect of everything that it is responsible for anytime. So it's almost like a nonstop continuous diagnostic.
Yes.
The computer knows when there's something off, the head in section 32 is not flushing correctly, and it fixes it. So that there's a lot of maintenance isn't really in the hands of humans. A lot of it, it is in all effect, it is Colossus, the Forbin project.
Yeah. And I think this extends throughout everything. Like, I think, we've got a pretty good idea that when Wesley is sitting there telling the ship to do stuff, when he's tapping on his control panel, he's really saying like, go over there. He's not telling it how to do it. He's basically programming the autopilot, right? This starship was designed by Airbus. And I personally think that like when Worf is doing stuff, they're feeding him, the computer's feeding him information, and it's using like predictive algorithms and stuff like that. So it's not just here's the sensor picture. It's here's what we think is going on and think's going to happen, and here's the 3 different ways that we think that you could counter this. Pick one, or he can do something else, right? So that's why I think that like you never see somebody just sitting there going like this for a long period of time to set things up. I mean, I've watched people set up a harpoon shot, right? It takes a little bit of poking to set up a harpoon shot. But the Worf does like punches 3 buttons, and next thing you know, there's torpedoes coming out. And I think that's because the computer's doing a lot of it. He's just functioning as a high-level decision maker.
Yeah, the computer is doing all the math for him behind the scenes, and then all he has to do is press the button.
And I think it's not only doing all the math, it's functioning as the world's most incredible tactical decision aid. It's doing AI level predictions about what it thinks the bad guys are going to do. It's like, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing that. This is what I think is going to happen. The way to counter it is to do this, or if it's this other thing, it's to do this, etc. And the humans are making high level decisions in all of this. And I suspect that it's one of those things you hear about centaurs as being, man-machine teams. They call those centaurs. And I think that this is one of those things that it fits in like it just works better to have a highly trained Starfleet officer on the loop. Notice I said on the loop, not in the loop. Because the computer's doing a bunch of stuff automatically, and a lot of it is just basically saying, yeah, that one go.
Yep.
And it just happens to work better. There's a article that I read fairly recently, a short paper came out last year, I think last year. Like October of last year, by an Australian named Peter Layton. And it was something that was like an official Australian pub. And it was about AI in operational warfare. And it talks about, if one of the things about AI is that it's making predictions, it's like you've got your AI that's making predictions about what the other guy's going to do, and it's also trying to screw up the other guy's predictions. And I'm reading this thing and I'm going like, yeah, this is what Worf is doing. This is what we see happening there.
Yep.
And so I'm probably going to add that to the list of things. There's a handful of documents that I try to reread on a regular basis, and I'm probably going to add that to the list. And I'm segueing now. What I was originally going to do was going to talk about one of those, because there's a series of these things that I want to go through and sort of pull the thread on a little bit. And so they include things like, there's an essay by Admiral Harris Lanning, dated May 1933, when he took over as the president of the Naval War College, called The Naval Battle, where he explains how to think about battleship combat and airplanes, right? Because you had aircraft carriers in 1933, but the airplanes weren't fully capable of doing everything they could during the war, but that was clearly on the horizon. And Lanning had written an essay when he was a student at the War College 10 years previously, and then he shows up as president of the War College, and he discovers that they're using his essay as one of the required readings, and he said, I've learned a lot more about this topic. Let me rewrite that. There's a couple of articles by a guy named Karl Lautenschlager, who worked, I don't know if he's still working, for Sandia or Los Alamos. I can't remember which one. And Wright asks if I have a copy of that essay. I'm going to start putting stuff like this up on Scribd if it's not there already, or find some place to do it. So I don't have one available for everybody yet, but I'll put it up someplace and let people know.
You can always also make a Google Doc that has links and whatnot on it.
Yeah. I'll find some place to put it and put it up there, because I want people to have the opportunity to look at this stuff. So Lautenschlager wrote a chapter called The Dreadnought Revolution Reconsidered, where he talks about like what was so special about the Dreadnought, right? Short answer, systems integration. Everything on the Dreadnought, every single piece of technology on the Dreadnought had been deployed in some cases for a decade or more previously. But nobody had put it all together. And when you put it all together, it was an exponential increase in capability, not additive. He also wrote something called Technology and the Evolution of Naval Warfare, where when I do my naval metaphors talk about the different warfare areas and stuff like that, a lot of that, my thinking on that was originally generated from that article. Julian Corbett is famous for writing some principles of maritime strategy, but at the very back of the book, the version of that book that most people have, which is one that came out in like the 1980s, if I remember correctly, there's something called The Green Pamphlet, which is a short little essay that he wrote. Originally, he wrote it for the Royal Navy. It was originally classified. It's wrote it like 1918, 1920, something like that. Trent Hone has something called The Evolution of Fleet Tactical Doctrine. He's done a lot of interesting research about what the U.S. Navy was doing in the interwar period. That's especially interesting to read along with the Lanning article, because you can see the parts where Lanning lied.
Wow. Because
the U.S. Naval Tactical Doctrine was based on doing something that everybody assumed you would do the opposite of it. And so he talks about we're going to do the thing like everybody else where we get in parallel lines and we shoot at each other, when the real tactic was to do this. Now, I think he lied. I need to go back and reread Hone and figure out, it may be that our doctrine changed, but I think it's the case. I think it's the case that he lied. I think he get his unclassified answer and his classified answer were different. And then the final one is actually something that I've just recently reread and realized I need to add to the list. And it's actually a gaming product for the Traveller universe. It's by a guy named Martin Doherty, who's a British defense analyst, and it's called Sector Fleet. And it's a really, really good, it's very Traveller centric, but it's a really good way of thinking about navies and stuff like that. And I know that with the landing stuff, landing talks about what various ships are good at and gives the sort of the assumptions based upon that. And my intent is to sort of go back and sort of match those up to Star Trek ships and say, do these assumptions hold, and what can we learn from that? So yeah, that's on my list of things to do.
All right. Well, hey, I've got a jet. I've got.
Yep. It's time to let Lissa go home.
Yeah,
well, she is home, but it's time to let Lissa stop working.
Thanks for having me on, and thanks to all the I see all the regulars. And Darko says, "I want more Axanar. I'm not getting any younger." Hey, yeah, neither am I, Darko. We're with you, man. We want it. We're working on it. So I've got a big meeting this week too.
COVID came along at exactly the wrong time.
Yeah, it's true. COVID came in like right smack dab in the middle of everything and kind of put a wrench in everyone's plans.
Yeah. So we're getting there. All right. Well, listen, I'm going to say goodnight. Thank you, Chris, as always. Will you have your presentation for next week?
So I don't know. My goal is to have it ready for next week, but I'm running this online conference. It's called Connections Online. It's an online wargaming conference, and Lissa's going to help out with it. The core is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So I finish the conference at 4:00 on Thursday. I then at 6:00 go and get a COVID shot, a COVID booster. And so we'll see what the COVID booster does to me on Friday. I'm taking Friday off because my default assumption is that I'll just want to sleep all day. Between the conference and the COVID booster, I'm kind of assuming that's going to be what happens, because that's usually
the booster, like the third one.
Booster.
Okay. I oddly enough, at least with mine, I had Pfizer. I did not really have any side effects with it.
I don't have much side effects. I am a member of House Pfizer as well, but I just kind of feel blah the next day.
It's
like
true.
I
got the flu shot at the same time. So like I was sleepy, but that was about it.
Flu shot never bothers me. The shingles shot, on the other hand, boom. The
flu shot's the one that always bothers me.
So if you want to hear about bad vaccination stories. So my buddy James Starrett, who's at the Army General Command and Staff College, he's got a PhD in Russian history, and he's also a science fiction gamer, and I really need to get him on the show. He was one of Ken Burnside's demo guys for a long time. So he'd go to cons and demo Attack Vector. And he was going to go give a lecture at one of the African war colleges. And so in order to do that, he needs to get a yellow fever vaccine. He missed 6 weeks of work.
Wow.
He was like down for the count for 6 weeks. I mean, and then he just felt crappy, but he could go back to work. And apparently that's not that weird.
Yeah, some vaccines in particular are like really rough on people's immune systems.
And he, he's a very smart guy. Some people would have come away from that experience saying, well, that was a mistake. I never should have gotten that vaccine. He came away from that experience and said, I am so glad I got that vaccine, because if that taught me anything, it said if I caught yellow fever, it would kill me.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, here's what before we get into the vaccines talk. We're gonna close it on this. The Wendell Guild asks, please give us an Axanar fun fact. So we'll end an Axanar fun fact. How about this? Alex Borstein, who did the music for Prelude to Axanar, studied under both Hans Zimmer and Bear McCreary, literally the #1 film composer and the #1 TV composer. So there you go. How's that for your fun fact?
That's a great fun fact. Let me ask you a quick question, Alec.
Sure.
What's the current state of the bridge?
The bridge. Yeah, we just did an update video. Stogie's editing another update video. It's all put together. The structure's put together. They were leveling it the other day. The next thing we had lunch with Dana 2 days ago. He said they're going to be putting the upper screens in next, and the flooring down. So that's kind of where we are. So we're getting there.
Any estimate as to how long until it's back up?
A couple months. Yeah, I'm thinking 60 days, and when we're ready to roll.
Okay.
Because we work once every couple weeks, so it's just where we're at. So, all right, I got a jet. Everyone, thanks so much.
All right, sounds good. Talk to you
Have
later,
a good
everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.